Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Grass. I'm the executive editor of Route 50, and as we quick do a scene change here, I just want to thank everyone again for joining us here today in Denver, and also to those who are tuning in via the webcast. Thanks. We are here to talk about elections administration today for the next 45 minutes or so. As you know, there is an election a couple weeks away. Early voting has started. Hopefully you are all aware of that. And with me today, we have three great people to talk about elections administration, what has worked here in Colorado with the implementation of the Voter Access and Modernize Elections Act, which was passed by the legislature back in 2013. And we'll be talking a little bit about how that came to be and where we are now. And each of our panelists are going to be giving a short presentation, and then we're going to be getting into some conversation and then hopefully some Q&A with the audience towards the end of this section. And for those who are in the audience, here in Denver and elsewhere around the country. If you have questions, please tweet those using the hashtag data-driven policy, and some of the personnel on site here will try to relay those to our panel here. So with me, we have Colorado Secretary of State, Wayne Williams, in the center seat. We have Amber McReynolds, who is the elections director for the city and county of Denver. And at the far end is Sam Durheimer, who manages elections initiatives at the Pew Charitable Trusts. So just before I turn things over to the Secretary of State, who is going to give a brief presentation about the election administration modernization implementation in Colorado. As journalists, we oftentimes are trained to ask the basic questions: the who, what, when, where, why, and how. We oftentimes focus on the who, what, when, and where. Sometimes we get around to the why, but overall we should be asking more questions about how. The how of how government does things is why we're here today. It's about implementation. It's about learning best practices. And what's great about this group here, we have representative from the state level and from the local level, because oftentimes what happens at the state capitol influences what happens in city halls. And it's great to have that intergovernmental discussion, which I think we should be having more of in this day and age. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to the Secretary of State, Wayne Williams. Thanks.
Well, good morning. Before I actually talk about my presentation, let me give a plug for Go Code Colorado. GoCodeColorado.co is a data-driven process that we use to make publicly available information available, and it's part of what we are working at in Colorado to make those data sets, those large data sets, available. And it's a cooperative venture between the Colorado Secretary of State's office, the governor's office, and a number of other agencies. And so we work very hard. It has actually won the CIO 100, was named one of their winners across the country, competing with Kroger and FedEx and all of these other Fortune 500 companies, and then the Colorado Secretary of State's office. So it was kind of a fun little thing. But let me talk about, okay, let's go the right way. I want to talk a little bit about these four things, what the election model is, because I know some viewers may not be aware of how things work in Colorado, a little bit about voter registration and list maintenance, voter turnout, and then election security. And I'm not reading everything on the slide. So one of the things you need to know is that Colorado has morphed over time. We went from you had to get an excuse to get an absentee ballot to you could request one for no reason to you could request to permanently be one. And then if you looked at the data, you saw that 70% of Coloradans had moved and said, we want to get our ballot by mail. Now, to my friends in when I talked to the New Hampshire Secretary of State, he's very confused by how this could possibly be the case. And the answer is we have judicial retention elections, so most people have no idea who they are, so they want to research. And second, we added this provision in our Constitution when we set up our state that makes it relatively easy to amend the Constitution. So we usually have ballot issues. In fact, you'll often hear more ads for them than you will the candidates. And then in 1992, we passed something called Tabor, which said the voters have to approve any tax or debt issue. So think about analyzing tax and debt questions, walking into the polling place as you're presented with this question of, should you spend $315 million on this particular issue? And then, are you going to be able to make that decision in the 10 minutes you should be in that voting booth? Probably not. And so lots of people opted for vote by mail. And so in 2013, Colorado went to a shift that says that all active mail voters, or all active voters receive a ballot by mail, changed the in-state residency requirement, provided that you can register to vote and vote through Election Day, and then it provides that we make changes in those voting lists, and we have certain voter service and polling centers that you can vote in person. It's 1 per county in the small counties. It's 25 roughly in the large counties, with about half opening in the first part for 2.5 weeks, and the other half opening on Election Day. Why is it important to have more on Election Day? Well, you talk about data. This is how our 2 million voters voted once this law was passed. So in the last gubernatorial election, I kept wanting to call it the Secretary of State election, but I just couldn't justify it that way. And so I'm still calling it the gubernatorial election. But you'll see that in the first week of voting at these voter service and polling centers, which are the little gray bars, a little over 4,000 people voted in person throughout the state. It raised to 12,000 in the following week. And then on the day before the election, the Monday before the election, we had 9,000 folks vote in person, and then 73,000 vote on Election Day. So you see that there's this huge ramp up of in-person voting as we go forward. You'll also notice these large gold bars, which are significantly higher because the overwhelming majority of Coloradans choose to vote the mail ballot that is sent to them. In fact, we've got 17% vote in the first 2 weeks for the in-person, and 83% vote in those last 2 days. So part of that, then, if you're going to vote the mail ballot, we want to make sure you're able to have that mail ballot counted. And we've had some counties that have had elections that have been decided by ballots that were delivered late by the post office. We shifted in Colorado to eliminate where we only have 2 mail processing centers in the entire state. So if you're in the southwest corner of or the southern part of the state in the Rio Grande Valley, it's going to get sent to Denver and then sent back, and it might show up before the election, or it might not. And so we worked with a program. We tried to get the legislature to adopt it and make it mandatory with an exception. They didn't, so we made it optional and provided funds. And as a result, we have a number of counties that have adopted 24/7 drop boxes. You'll see a much higher density in the metro area, not surprisingly. For those from out of state, those darker counties are the Denver metro area. And then you see El Paso to the south. Let me talk about El Paso for a second. So you talk about using data. So this is the proposal I came up with when I was the El Paso County Clerk and Recorder for where we would locate those drop boxes. And the goal isn't that you have 10 drop boxes near you. The goal is you have at least 1. And so as we were looking at our initial list of drop boxes, we said, how do we get as many voters as possible? So we plotted travel times. And we said, this is where people live. And my chart's covering up the whole southeast corner, which is more than 20 minutes away, but there's only 2,500 people who live in that entire quarter of the county. And so as we looked at it, we said, how can we get as many people as possible near a drop box? And this gets, I think it was 98% within 10 to 15 minutes. Actually, I think that's within 95% within 10. And then another 4% that are 10 to 15 minutes away, and that was the initial group. And so clerks are using data to try and make decisions, not just on the big picture, but on placement issues, on where you locate voter service and polling centers. Are they near locations that have a bus line? Are they near population centers? Are they near where people are going anyways? We have also made it very easy to register to vote in Colorado. You can go to govotecolorado.com. We were one of the first few states that had a online voter registration. We were the first to optimize it for mobile devices. And then a few months ago, we unveiled the just text CO or text Colorado to vote. And that's how easy it is. You can also register in a number of other ways. And I don't know, did we ever get this slide where we actually hooked up? Okay, we'll skip we've run a campaign to encourage people to use this process. As a result, Colorado has the highest percentage of registered voters in the country. And as I see clerks and staff members from across this area, a lot of that credit goes to them and their staff who work very hard to make that happen. Our state is also very evenly split. So there's the current numbers as of October 1st, and you'll see that it's almost exactly even. It's 32, 32, 33 with another 1% for parties that are smaller. So one of the things we looked at is, do things matter that you publicize? So this is the voter registrations online over the last roughly month, and you see this huge spike when Facebook posted, hey, have you registered to vote? And then you see a beginning of a spike when Google does a registration advertisement. And then on National Voter Registration Day, the clerks and I did a number of media appearances and events, and you see a spike. Still not as big as the Facebook spike. So for all of our efforts, and all the TV stations, and all the radio interviews, a little announcement on Facebook actually gave a bigger spike than these other events did. This tells you that Colorado did see a slight increase in turnout when you go from 55% of registered voters to 56% or almost 57% as a result of the change, or perhaps ballot issues. We don't know. But most people choose to vote that mail ballot. I note there's a few issues. We had about 60 individuals that registered same day that the post office said aren't around. So voter list maintenance, we do a number of things to try to make our list as pure as possible. I think Sam's going to talk a little bit about that, because as we mail out information to folks, it is sometimes challenging if they don't live there. And so we're trying to make our list as accurate as possible, and we'll work with liberal and conservative groups to make those list maintenance programs better. We participate in ERIC, which is an important process that Pew helped start. Colorado is one of the original founders. You see that today we've got 20 states in that. That's where we share that information so that people don't register in multiple states. And that gives you just some basis. So what's happened, you see that Colorado was number 5 in 2008, and we were number 7 in 2010. Secretary of State then did a huge voter registration campaign, and we bumped up to number 3 in 2012. We then adopted the current Colorado election model. We stayed at number 3 in an off-year election, and so Colorado is very active. I should note, for those concerned about election security, we are not connected to the internet. So usually at one of these questions, one of the issues I will have is, how come we can't vote online? Well, we're not ready for that. The security isn't there, but you should know that your vote in Colorado is totally safe. It is not tabulated on the internet. It is not counted on the internet. And because most of us vote by a mail ballot, there's a paper ballot that is the actual record. And the new system that we adopted in Colorado voting system, has a paper ballot even for every in-person voter. And so there are a number of things that we do to make it better, but those are safe systems. There's a statewide voter registration base that's connected online that has a high level of security. So if you want to find more data, so Colorado actually believes in data, and so we have the Accountability in Colorado Elections. There's the website for it, and you can get all of that information yourself. You do not have to call the government to get it. It is available for you to sort by county, to look at, and you want to have election cost stats. You can look at gross cost. You can look at gross cost per voter. You can look at net cost and net cost per voter. Try to make it easy as possible to make it so you can use data to make decisions both as a public policy maker and as a public policy influencer. So thank you for your participation today.
Thank you. Next, we'll go down to the city and county level with Amber McReynolds.
I'm a little shorter, so I gotta pull this down. So it's a pleasure to be here today, and I thank Pugh and Route 50 for the opportunity to be a part of this panel. My name is Amber McReynolds, and I'm the Director of Elections for the City and County of Denver, so welcome to our city. It's a beautiful day today. I hope you'll all get to enjoy it. And I like to talk about all the things that we've been able to do in Denver. The Secretary covered a lot of the new reforms that we advocated for in 2013, and I'm going to share some of the results of those reforms and how we're going to look at those and sort of plan for the future around it. So I like to call our sort of program and our vision in Denver Mile High Innovation, and it very much is a strategic vision on enhancing the voter's experience and the customer's experience using data and metrics. And I'm going to talk about a couple of the ways that we've done that, either from a policy perspective, but also from a technology perspective. And when we're approaching any new technology, this is sort of our value stream that we look at as it relates to developing new customer service programs, new processes and procedures for the voting process, and then advocacy around voting generally, or ways that we can improve and continue to improve the voter's experience. And a couple of examples, and Secretary Williams went over the model, but I want to spend a little time today talking about two of the pieces of the model in particular that have had a significant impact not only in Denver but across the state. Before I sort of dive into voter registration and list maintenance, exceptional and innovative policies are very much the result of data-driven metrics and the story that our customers are telling us. And that information is mainly housed in local governments. So that's about the calls that we get into our call centers. That's about the emails that we get from voters about the status of their ballots. That's about the calls that we get about where to go vote. All of those things are what local governments need to be looking at to advocate for appropriate policy changes in the future, and that very much is that direct connection, direct engagement, if you will, with the citizens. And that's not just in elections, it's happening across the spectrum of government. And so we really want to look at what is the story that voters are telling us? How are they interacting with us? What are the citizens requesting? And how can we make better decisions? How can we improve their engagement overall? So for voter registration, when we modernized voter registration a few years ago, there's a couple pieces of the law that are significant and that I hope to see other states adopt as well. And we've already started to see some of these changes. The current Colorado active voter registration statistics, and we did put a half-sheet page that has some of this information on it. Colorado is very much purple. We have 32% Democrats, 32% Republicans, and interestingly enough, 35% of Colorado is unaffiliated. And I think this is a good example of a metric that we really need to look at over the next few years to determine if our policies relating to primary elections or other things are being responsive to what the voters are self-selecting, and that is unaffiliated, at least as of right now in Colorado. And then these are some of the things that the reforms did, and I'll talk about some of the results of this, but the elimination of the 30-day precinct requirement is probably the most unnoticed part of the reform that had the biggest impact. Now we have a 22-day state residency requirement. So I'm pretty sure that you probably didn't call the election office to say, hey, is there an election in 30 days before I schedule my moving company to come and move me to another county in the state? Before, we had this 30-day precinct requirement, and that really was an inhibitor for voters, and it created a lot of provisional ballots. So now, by registering up to and on election day, allowing voters to be mobile in their own environments, just like they do in their normal everyday lives, has been significant. And this is the results. So in 2010 and 12, you can see just over 2%, 2.5% of Coloradans, and this is statewide, voted using a provisional. Well, the majority of those provisionals counted. We just didn't process them until 2 weeks after the election. So those results came in the final tally across the state. When we did our reforms in 2013, we reduced provisional ballot voting in Colorado by 98%. We had less than 1,000 provisionals cast statewide. And this is very much the result of the 30-day precinct change and same-day registration. Those are the two pieces of the reforms that had the biggest impact and the greatest impact here. And we anticipate this is going to be also a great metric for us to be looking at this year. The second part of the model that relates to voter registration is list maintenance. And Secretary Williams talked about this and Colorado's participation in some of the national programs. But this is really about, if we're going to be delivering a ballot out to voters, we really need to know where the voter is. And this, for us, starts with the voting process. And I would guess that come November 9th, the statewide voter registration database likely has the most current and accurate information of all Coloradan citizens in it than any other database. And the reason is that's the majority of voters are going to vote in this election. They've updated their information, they've registered, they've interacted with our office in some way to make sure their information is correct. And so Colorado has started to participate in ERIC, and that is a national sort of data exchange platform that crosses states and makes sure that we have the most accurate information for voters. And we're seeing cost savings, we're seeing less undeliverable mail, we're seeing significant results of that. And ERIC is a project that Pew actually started, Sam, David Becker, some of the folks that were involved in that initially, and it's continued and it's fantastic and states are really benefiting from this. But this again is data exchange across states. And then for us in Colorado, we took a little more aggressive approach to NCOA. NCOA is the National Change of Address database through the post office. And that you can get that information through ERIC, but what you do with it is why Colorado is different. And in Colorado, we are now proactively updating voters' records if they move within state or if they move cross county. So if you go from Denver to Arapahoe County is going to pull your record in, and they're going to automatically send you a ballot to the new address. And this is just, again, better engagement for the citizens so that they can get their ballot and vote appropriately. And then finally, because of the success of these two programs and the way that we've been using this, the possibilities associated with this are endless. So in the future and in the vision of Colorado and sort of what the legislature, I think, can do to look at this cross sort of agencies at the state level is creating a platform where citizens can go, update their address in one place, and it hits the voter registration database, it hits motor vehicle, it hits human services, it hits all the databases that are essentially tracking and collecting the same information. So this is a good example of where we've had tremendous success in elections, and I think that it can be sort of replicated across other state agencies in making our lists and our better engagement with the citizens. And then just briefly, ballot delivery is a big thing in our state. In Denver, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a few slides, but we created, and this is a first in the nation technology, but we created this in 2009, and it's called Ballot Trace, and it basically enables the voters to track their mail ballot packet through the process. So from the moment it's been printed all the way till we accept the signature and send the ballot in for counting. And it gives voters, we are pushing that data proactively to voters so that they can get the transparency around their mail ballot, given that that's our model. And we created it because we looked at the data from 2008 in the presidential election, and we had over 57,000 calls into our call center. So 1 in 5 voters had to call the city and county of Denver to either find out about their mail ballot, find out where their polling place was, or ask us a question about the election. And what we wanted to do was figure out a way to connect the voters directly to their data so they didn't have to call us anymore. And this program in and of itself, in addition to some of the other things that we've been able to do, has driven down that call volume significantly. So if we go back to 2008 and compare to today in the same time frame, we today have seen a 95% reduction in our calls into our call center, mainly because of this program, but also because of the other things that we've been doing, including the voting model changes. So that's significant. That's big cost savings because running a call center is significant. And this, again, is another example of connecting that data to the citizen and making things easier for them. And then finally, our in-person options, and I won't go over this too much, but we preserve that option in our model. So finally, just to sort of wrap up around some of the things that I've talked about, the technical solutions that we've created in Denver to better serve voters have provided provided significant value in terms of our election operations, but also just proactively putting information out to citizens so that they can strategically engage with our office. And a couple of those, I've talked about ballot trace, but to give you an idea of our current stats, when we started off with this program, we continued to build up the subscribers, and now we are over 30% of our voting database is now subscribed to ballot trace. So we have 127,000, almost 130,000 subscribers. We're pushing this information out via text or email, and voters got a whole slew of texts and emails from us the other day when we printed the ballots. They're going to get another slew when we send them next week, and then they get a final confirmation once we've received it back. So this is significant, and these are, instead of these being calls to us, they are clicks and they're proactive messaging out to the voters. And then the other thing that we've implemented is a text to case. So in the city and county of Denver, you can text strategic words into our hotline and we auto-generate responses. So on the outside of our mail ballot packet, when you return it, if you get into your car and you're like, oh, where's the nearest drop box? You can actually text VSPC to this number. It'll respond and give you the closest geographic drop box or location to you, and then give you directions on how to get there. So we've literally connected, again, customer service data directly to the voter to benefit them. And then finally, a program that we hope to see others adopt, and there's a lot of states interested in purchasing this IP from us. And I know the state of Colorado has some work to do, certainly on petitions and making that process more better. But in Denver, we have created Denver eSign, which is a digital petition application, and we've seen, again, tremendous results from this. We've also now added a VRD module, voter registration drive module, to it. So instead of you being approached with a clipboard and paper on 16th Street Mall or somewhere else, circulators can actually use a tablet, and you can sign right on there with the voter registration module. It has a camera. It'll take a picture of a student ID or any other ID that the voter might have with them so that their record gets completed right away. And these are the stats from petitions. So those candidates that opted to use the digital petition process in 2015 had a 97% acceptance rate. Paper, it was only about 70%. So candidates and campaigns can realize the efficiencies of circulating and getting access to the ballot if they use the digital app versus paper. So to conclude, that kind of gives you a rundown of how we've made strategic decisions on policy, but also made strategic decisions around technology. And I think connecting the two are very important as we move forward and as we create more strategic engagement opportunities for citizens to interact with government, and we can certainly make things more efficient overall. So my contact information is up there if there's any questions that I don't get to answer today. So thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. Thanks.
Next up, we have Sam Durheimer from the Pew Charitable Trust, who has spent a lot of time doing research on the work that's been done in Colorado and elsewhere around the country. So we're going to take a look at Colorado and the rest of the country from a national perspective.
Great. So yeah, I'm Sam Durheimer. I manage all of Pew's voting and elections work, and I have both the problem and privilege of going last. In that you just heard two wonderful presentations, data packed, a lot of information. They covered so much ground that it's tough to go after. On the privilege is they covered so much ground that I can be very quick, and I'm going to give you a quick national perspective and sit down so we can have a discussion. So we're here today, and you've heard a lot of great information about how Colorado has been on the forefront of innovation to host elections with voters in mind. Right? In 2016, we live in a mobile and pretty tech-savvy society. We have left behind the days where a majority of Americans are born and then stay in a single locality for the majority of their lives. We see census data that in any given year, around 1 in 8 Americans move. And if you look at younger Americans or members of the military, this number increases dramatically, up to as many as 1 in 4 Americans moves in a single year. And so we've seen a shift. Rather than setting one place, one time, one method to cast a ballot, election officials are going to the voters and instead finding them where they are. And in addition to everything you've already heard this morning about how Colorado is doing that, right? We've talked about how Colorado was a very early adopter of some of the tools and policies that have had a really big impact over the past few election cycles. You heard about online voter registration. Colorado is one of the first states to adopt online voter registration, giving voters control of their own data. You heard about the Electronic Registration Information Center, ERIC, allowing election officials to share information across state borders to learn who should be registered and who needs to update their registration. Yeah. And the result of these efforts so far has been very positive. So we at Pew find that Colorado ranks very highly in our election performance index, which is kind of a performance matrix of state election administration. So basically, how well does a state do at managing and hosting an election? Colorado has ranked very highly in every iteration of our elections performance index, dating back to 2008 when we debuted the index. And we see the significant impact of Colorado's innovation and policy making when comparing like elections, so 2010 prior to the Modernization Act and 2014. We saw, as I believe Amber mentioned earlier, a significant reduction in the number of provisional ballots cast. In 2010, nearly 40,000. In 2014, under 1,000. Colorado saw a significant reduction in the rate of disability and illness-related voting problems. Turnout increased and costs decreased by as much as 40%. And so here, what I've shown here is the 2014 Elections Performance Index. Colorado ranks pretty highly at 6th overall in the entire nation. And if you play with the index, which it's designed to do, it's designed to add or take out indicators. And if you remove a couple of indicators, mail ballots rejected and mail ballots unreturned, Colorado actually jumps to the #1 ranked state in the country. Because Colorado mails ballots to everyone in the entire state, your rate of potential problems is going to be significantly higher than those states where a majority of voters vote in person. So here we see the result of Colorado's innovation and policy making. Smart, data-driven policymaking has launched Colorado to the top of the class. And I encourage all of you to go to pewtrust.org/elections, navigate to our performance index, and see for yourself. And so with that, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to open it up to Mike.
Thanks. I would definitely encourage those here in the audience and those watching remotely to play around with the Elections Performance Index. It's always fascinating to compare the different experiences in different states, seeing who's doing what well, who's not doing things well.
For the record, I asked Sam to make that change to show what happens, because I started playing around with it and I said, well, we mail ballots to everybody. Of course we have more of them that aren't returned. In a state that only mails a ballot to you if you ask specifically for it, yeah, you're probably returning it. So I asked him to take that out and say, because I had done it and I saw that Colorado does indeed show up as #1.
I just moved from the District of Columbia to Seattle, and Washington State is a mail-in ballot state, and I know exactly where the nearest drop box is. It sort of seems like as more and more states move to the mail-in approach, that that satisfying moment of voting when you're in the actual ballot booth and then turning it in is going to shift to, you get that satisfaction of participating in democracy by dropping the ballot in. Anyhow, where should we go next? It's been interesting to watch the experience in Colorado over the past couple years. The act was passed in 2013. We're now in 2016. What has been the reaction from voters and just the general public overall? I mean, do you get the sense that they feel that the process is improving? Obviously, a lot of the stats and findings that you've had here show a lot of improvement. How does that resonate with the public?
Well, I can speak to that. I mean, I think prior to the modernization, we had a lot of, frankly, frustrated voters that would call us in the larger elections and say, you mailed a ballot to me in the school board election, but I didn't get it for the presidential or the gubernatorial. And that was because we were doing so many off-year elections, all by mail ballot, so voters were getting used to it. And then literally in the gubernatorial and the presidentials were the only two elections that we weren't just proactively pushing these out. So there was a lot of confusion, and we frankly took a lot of complaints in 2012. And even though Colorado, had a very high turnout, over 90%, it still was very frustrating to be a voter in a lot of ways. And so now, instead of complaints, we're getting compliments, we're getting tweeted with people taking a picture of their ballot trace message saying, wow, this is cool, I know it's been printed. And then I think just our driver in Denver, a 95% reduction in calls into the call center when you compare the same time frames from 2008 to now is tremendous. And then we have to take that seriously, because that is our voters telling us, yes, we're good, yes, we have the information we need, and we know how to interact with you and get what we need. And I always call it kind of calls to clicks. So instead of them calling us, they can now get it either on the website or through a text or an email from us directly. So
obviously through Eric, a lot of states are collaborating on elections administration and innovation. Within Colorado, obviously you work for the largest, most populated jurisdiction. How?
She does not.
Oh, is that?
Yeah, we
okay.
do
I
now.
stand corrected.
Now we
It'd be
do.
El Paso County.
El Paso County. Okay.
Yeah.
Last census data, at least.
Well, voter registration data today,
Yes.
Denver's the big, so yeah. But there you go.
That's
It's
because
the
there are
smallest.
kids in El Paso County who can't vote yet. But total population,
Yeah.
El Paso County is the state's largest county. Something people in
landmass-wise.
Denver occasionally forget. Those of us from Colorado Springs have to remind them of occasionally.
Everyone lives on top of each other.
See, we thought we were going to talk about data at this session,
But which data point do you use? Registered voters, or do you
precisely.
use total population?
It's true.
Yeah.
What's the discussion across county lines in terms of the implementation? What are the best practices? I mean, would you assess that most of the counties are sort of performing at the same level, or do you view that Denver is doing a couple other things that puts the programs here and the outreach efforts ahead of your peers in other parts of the state?
No, I think generally overall, all counties have adopted this model. They're seeing the very similar positive impacts, and I think every county is different in that some counties, like in Denver, we're under Section 203, so we have multiple languages to provide. So we have to, our service model and the way we deliver customer service is going to be different than other counties. And we also run a few more elections in Denver because we have municipal and we have home rule elections. We manage campaign finance for a lot of that. So I think just it's hard to compare service to service with counties, but just from a best practices perspective, by having a similar program across the state for the way voting happens has enabled counties to share the best of the best ideas, best practices. Similar business processes and models are at the vote centers now. We all use the same web application to check voters in. So those things have all made generally the election operation healthier across Colorado, because counties can have those discussions and really share the best practices across counties.
And I think one of the things you see is by different counties coming together and having discussions, both with the Clerks Association where they meet and also with our office, you get ideas from various counties. And so Arapahoe developed something. Arapahoe decided, these mail ballot drop boxes, what happens if someone throws a match in them? And so they ran a test showing that they won't actually burn because there's not enough oxygen in them. But each of the counties get to develop and come up with things. You even had the fire department throwing accelerant in there to try to get it to go. I'm not saying do this, please do not do this. But each of the counties work on developing things. So one says, well, what if we took the drop box and we said, hey, you can drop off your tax payments there, your motor vehicle. What if we open it up to municipal elections? And sometimes when they're concerned about, well, where do we put a drop box, they can talk to one of their peers. They said, well, we talked to this special district, or we talked to the city, and that worked for us. And so you see a lot of those innovations. And things do work differently. So one of the things, being the Secretary of State for the whole state, I get to actually leave the Front Range. And for example, if you're in Mineral County and you didn't get your ballot, the sheriff will deliver it to you. They are small enough that the clerk can walk across the hall to the sheriff and say, please take this to Sally Smith. She needs her ballot. That hand delivery from the government doesn't take place at other more urban counties, but each of those counties are working to fit their voters and make sure that their voters have the opportunity to participate in that elections process.
And I'd say in addition to that, not only has Colorado really worked to make the process itself easier, but you're putting the information out there so the voters can find it, especially if they are not just moving city to city or county to county, but if you have new voters coming in. Colorado has done a wonderful job of putting the information voters need to navigate the process where they can easily find it. We've done a lot of research, and voters don't know the process as well as they once did. We polled several states and asked them, who is your chief election official? We asked, this won't surprise you at all. We asked voters in Ohio and in Texas, and less than 10% could accurately name who their election official was. So by putting the information out where voters are naturally going to come across it, not only is the process once they are voting easier, but they've found the information they need to navigate the process to begin with, no matter where in the state they are.
And that's, I think, an important part of it, is putting it online. Most of our state has access easily to the internet. There's some few rural parts, or many rural parts, that don't have that, but most of our voters live in the urban area. And so they can access that. They can go to that same texting CO to vote will also let you get your sample ballot ahead of time. It will let you find your voter service and polling centers. And I should note, for those who aren't familiar with it, one of the other things that I think Amber and I both skipped over in that process that really helped reduce provisional ballots is you don't have to go to your local polling place. You can show up anywhere in the county, and so if you work one place, go to another place, and then that allows new challenges for clerks because they can't control who goes where. So if everybody shows up at one location, how do you address for that? And so our clerks are prepared for that process, we hope, this election.
And I was going to add too, I think one of the things that we've done in Denver, and Governor Hickenlooper talked about sort of the lean principles and how to apply that to government. Denver, we're lucky, in the city and county of Denver, we've created a peak performance team, and it's citywide, and it's based on those lean principles, and we have a whole training program now implemented for city employees to get that training, and they actually contract with other local governments and other entities to do that training. And all of my entire staff actually went through this training a few years ago, and we have some fantastic staff members and team members that have taken a lead on this, worked across agencies. We just did an event with Denver Human Services to help them streamline how they're doing voter registration, and that has resulted in we've implemented kiosks now in the human service locations for voter registration. We've retrained all of their staff, and we're already starting to see a greater number of transactions and voter registration data coming from those entities. And we've done similar work with motor vehicle, and so I think it's that lean principle and that approach to streamlining the process, making it easier not only for the customer, but then making it easier operationally. We're going to see those cost savings while delivering better service, which is significant.
So Colorado is working closely with the Secretary of State's office, and the clerks have been working with the Department of Revenue that is coming up with a new driver's license procedure, and we've been part of that process, making it easy for someone, once they get their driver's license, not to have to re-enter the information, so they're easily able to be registered at the same time as they get their driver's license. A year ago, we passed a bill in Colorado that allows clerks to update your record based on changes of your driver's license. So most people don't go to their clerk to start with. They go to driver's license, they go to the post office, they let them know they've moved. We can now use that data in Colorado.
So taking a step back and looking at the national picture a little bit, this has been an odd election cycle, to say the least. We're a couple weeks from Election Day, and you were referring earlier to throwing a match into the ballot box, and that's not really possible because of science. But there have been concerns. There's been one presidential candidate who has indirectly or directly sort of put it out there that the election could be rigged. From what we hear in Colorado, it's a very secure system from the cybersecurity concerns, which has been an issue popped up in other states, because there have been attacks on on Secretary of States and elections systems in different states. From the mood of your fellow Secretary of States around the country, how do you feel about where things are right now?
Sure. And so we have a presidential candidate who said that, then we had Obama's Secretary of Homeland Security say, oh, we may need to nationalize all of this process. And it didn't take long for the Secretaries of State to have a conference call with that secretary to say, no, you don't. But Colorado is further ahead than most other states. The mail ballots that you cast obviously are paper ballot records. So my worst case, an EMP pulse goes off and obliterates every bit of electronic data in the entire state. We have a paper ballot record. For the new counties that have adopted Colorado's voting system, Denver, Arapahoe, I see you're both here, they've both adopted that. Even the people who use an accessible device get a paper ballot record that is the actual record of their votes cast. Those using some older systems at least have some paper there. So, and that's compared after the election to a hand count to ensure that those machines are counting accurately. They're not connected to the internet. So Colorado is ready for this. We have a process that also makes it easier for Colorado to be ready for it than many other states.
And I was going to say, to look at it in a slightly different perspective, to look at it from the voter's perspective, voters have more confidence that their vote was accurately counted and cast when the process they went through was smooth and efficient, when they didn't have problems receiving their ballot, when they were able to drop their ballot off because they knew where to go, they knew a convenient location. Their experience is going to be better, and they're going to have less doubt that their vote was accurately cast. In states, with traditional polling places, where voters show up to the wrong polling place because they didn't know where to go, where their name was not accurately listed on the rolls, research has shown that this reduces their likelihood to believe their vote was accurately cast. So not only a this smooth process, actually, from the voter's perspective, increases their confidence in the entire process.
And I think too, it's important to separate the voter registration system and sort of the online voter registration and how voters interact with that, and the actual voting model and the way that votes are tallied. And I think it's important too, elections are local. So actually each county is responsible for the conduct, the administration, the operation of the election. We have a statewide voter registration system, but the voting systems themselves are self-contained within each county. They're off-network, they're not connected to the internet, they're not on any network even associated with the county, at the county level. So they are isolated, they're air-gapped, we have significant security, camera, 24/7 surveillance. So there are significant processes in place to ensure that the voting system itself and the way that votes are counted and tallied is secure, and that happens locally. That's not something that happens sort of at the state level and then pushed down. The state has the statewide voter registration system, and so that's the system that they worry about, but the voting system itself is local.
So I think we're just about out of time. I wanted to thank everyone here and our panelists. Some of the findings that you all have presented here, I hope serve as an inspiration for a lot of jurisdictions around the country that may not be totally satisfied with the way that their elections are being administered. So there's a lot of good work being done here in Colorado, and thank you, Secretary Williams, Amber, and Sam. So with that, I am going to turn things over to Scott Greenberger, the executive editor of State Line from the Pew Charitable Trusts. So thank you, everyone.